In a small, peaceful neighborhood on the edge of the city, life unfolded like a scene from a storybook. The streets were lined with trees that swayed gently in the breeze, and the air always carried the faint scent of blooming flowers. People here lived simple lives, cherishing moments with their families and enjoying the company of their pets. It was the kind of place where everyone knew each other by name, and smiles came easily. Among the residents was a man named Jason Statham. He wasn't just any ordinary neighbor. He had lived an adventurous life before settling down in this quiet corner of the world. Known for his calm demeanor and sharp eyes, Jason had once been a stuntman, performing death-defying stunts in movies. But now he preferred the slower pace of life, finding joy in simpler things. Recently, he had adopted two rescue dogs, Max and Luna, who quickly became the center of his world. Max was a golden retriever with a heart as big as his wagging tail. He loved chasing balls and rolling around in the grass. Luna, on the other hand, was a shy but loyal German shepherd who stuck close to Max like glue. Together, they brought laughter and warmth into Jason's home, filling the empty spaces left by years of solitude. Every morning, Jason would take them for long walks, stopping occasionally to chat with neighbors or let the dogs greet passing children. But not everything in the neighborhood was picture perfect. A group of bikers often disrupted the tranquility. They weren't locals. They belonged to a rough crowd from a nearby town. But they frequently roared through the streets on their loud motorcycles. Their engines growled like angry beasts, startling birds from the trees and sending cats scurrying under cars. Most people avoided them, pretending not to notice when they sped past, breaking speed limits and disturbing the peace. The leader of the group was a tall, muscular man known only as Razor. He wore leather jackets covered in patches and always had a sneer plastered across his face. Unlike his companions, Razor didn't seem content with just riding through the neighborhood. He enjoyed causing trouble. Whether it was revving his engine at stop signs or tossing trash onto lawns, he thrived on making others uncomfortable. His presence cast a shadow over the otherwise cheerful community. Despite the occasional disturbances, Jason tried to focus on the positives. He spent most of his days caring for Max and Luna, teaching them tricks and ensuring they felt safe and loved. Yet, deep down, he couldn't ignore the unease growing within him. Something about Razor and his gang felt dangerous, though he couldn't put his finger on why. Little did he know, fate was about to force him to confront that danger head-on, and it would all start with an act so cruel it would leave the entire neighborhood reeling. As the sun rose one morning, casting golden light over the sleepy streets, no one could have predicted how drastically their lives were about to change. For Jason, Max, and Luna, it would be the beginning of a journey filled with anger, courage, and ultimately, redemption. It was a bright, sunny afternoon, and the neighborhood seemed to hum with its usual rhythm. Birds chirped cheerfully in the trees, and a soft breeze carried the scent of freshly cut grass through the air. Jason had decided to step out for a quick trip to the grocery store, leaving Max and Luna in the safety of their front yard. The dogs were lying under the shade of a large oak tree, enjoying the coolness it provided from the midday sun. Max lazily chewed on his favorite rubber ball, while Luna rested her head on her paws, occasionally glancing up at passing cars or pedestrians. Everything seemed normal until the distant rumble of motorcycle engines broke the calm. It started as a faint growl, growing louder with each passing second. Soon, a group of bikers appeared at the end of the street, their shiny bikes reflecting the sunlight like mirrors. At the front of the pack was Razor, his leather jacket gleaming with patches that spoke of rebellion and recklessness. His face was set in a smirk, as if he already knew the chaos he was about to cause. As the bikers approached, Max perked up, tilting his head curiously at the strange noise. Luna, more cautious by nature, stood up and moved closer to her brother, her ears twitching nervously. The loud roar of the engines startled them both, but they stayed where they were, unsure of what to do. Razor noticed the two dogs almost immediately. His lips curled into a cruel grin as he slowed down, deliberately veering toward the edge of Jason's property. Without warning, Razor swerved his bike dangerously close to Max and Luna. Dust flew into their faces, making them cough and sneeze. But that wasn't enough for him. With a laugh that echoed down the street, Razor lifted his boot and delivered a sharp kick to Max's side. The poor dog yelped in pain, tumbling backward onto the grass. Luna barked wildly, trying to shield her injured friend, but Razor only laughed harder. He revved his engine one last time before speeding off, leaving behind a cloud of dust and a trail of fear. Max whimpered softly, struggling to get back on his feet. Luna stayed by his side, licking his face in an attempt to comfort him. Her tail, which had been wagging happily just moments ago, now hung low between her legs. The once peaceful yard felt heavy with tension, the joy replaced by confusion and hurt. Passers-by stopped in shock, unsure of how to react. One woman gasped loudly, clutching her chest, while a man muttered something about calling animal control. Across the street, Mrs. Harper, an elderly woman who often sat on her porch knitting, witnessed the entire scene unfold. Her hands froze mid-stitch, the needles clattering to the ground as she watched Razor's cruel act. She felt a surge of anger mixed with sadness, not just for the dogs, but for the kind of person who could find amusement in causing pain. Without hesitation, she grabbed her phone and dialed Jason's number, her fingers trembling slightly as she pressed the buttons. When Jason answered, Mrs. Harper's voice quivered as she explained what had happened. "Jason, it's Max and Luna," she said urgently. "One of those bikers, he kicked them. Poor Max is hurt." Her words tumbled out in a rush, laced with emotion. Jason's response was calm at first, but she could hear the undertone of concern in his voice. Promising to return home immediately, he hung up and sped toward the neighborhood, his mind racing with worry. Meanwhile, Mrs. Harper hurried across the street to check on the dogs herself. Kneeling beside Max, she gently stroked his fur, whispering soothing words to calm him. Luna sniffed at her hand cautiously before settling back down next to her brother. Though shaken, Mrs. Harper couldn't help but feel a spark of determination ignite within her. This wasn't just an attack on two innocent animals. It was an attack on the community's sense of safety and decency. And she knew, deep down, that someone like Jason wouldn't let this go unanswered. Mrs. Harper's heart sank as she knelt beside Max and Luna, her hands trembling as she tried to comfort them. The poor golden retriever was still whimpering softly, his big brown eyes filled with confusion and pain. Luna stayed close, her protective instincts kicking in as she hovered over her injured brother. Mrs. Harper could see the fear in their expressions. It was a look that no animal should ever have to wear. She whispered gentle words, hoping to reassure them that help was on the way, but her own voice wavered with emotion. Glancing up, she noticed a few neighbors had gathered at a distance, whispering among themselves. Some looked horrified, while others seemed unsure of what to do. A young boy clung to his mother's leg, tears streaming down his face as he watched Max struggle to stand. Why would someone hurt them? He asked innocently, his small voice breaking the tense silence. His mother didn't answer. Instead, she pulled him closer, shielding him from the sight. It was a moment that left everyone feeling powerless and angry. Mrs. Harper knew she had to act quickly. After calling Jason, she decided to stay with the dogs until he arrived. She fetched a bowl of water from her house and placed it near Max, encouraging him to drink. Luna nudged it toward him with her nose, her loyalty unwavering even in this difficult moment. Though Max managed a few sips, his movements were slow and labored, and Mrs. Harper couldn't shake the worry gnawing at her. What if his injuries were worse than they appeared? What if Razor came back? Time felt like it was moving in slow motion as Mrs. Harper waited for Jason to return. Every car that passed made her flinch, fearing it might be the bikers coming back to cause more trouble. Her mind raced with questions. Who was that man? Why would anyone find joy in hurting defenseless animals? And most importantly, how could such cruelty exist in a place that had always felt so safe? When Jason finally turned onto the street, his truck screeched to a halt in front of the house. He jumped out before it had fully stopped, his face pale with concern. In an instant, he was kneeling beside Max, his hands moving carefully over the dog's body to assess the damage. "What happened?" he demanded, his voice sharp but controlled. Mrs. Harper recounted everything she had seen: the bikers speeding by, Razor's deliberate swerve, the cruel kick, and the mocking laughter that followed. As she spoke, Jason's jaw tightened, and his dark eyes narrowed with barely contained fury. But Jason's anger wasn't reckless. Beneath the surface, his mind was already working, piecing together what needed to be done. First, he scooped Max into his arms, cradling the dog gently despite his own tension. "We need to get him to the vet," he said firmly, looking at Mrs. Harper. She nodded, offering to keep an eye on Luna while he took care of Max. Jason hesitated for a moment, reluctant to leave either of his beloved companions behind, but he trusted Mrs. Harper. With a final glance at Luna, who watched him with wide, trusting eyes, he climbed into his truck and sped off toward the veterinary clinic. As the sound of Jason's engine faded into the distance, Mrs. Harper sat on the grass next to Luna, stroking her fur absent-mindedly. The German shepherd leaned into her touch, seeking comfort after the traumatic event. Around them, the neighborhood began to stir again, though the earlier peace had been shattered. Neighbors exchanged worried glances, some shaking their heads in disbelief. One elderly man muttered under his breath about reporting the incident to the authorities, while a teenage girl snapped photos of the tire marks left by Razor's bike, vowing to share them online to raise awareness. For Mrs. Harper, however, the anger simmering inside her was personal. She had always believed in kindness, not just toward people, but toward all living creatures. Seeing Max hurt and Luna terrified had awakened something fierce within her. As she sat there with the loyal dog by her side, she silently promised herself that this wouldn't end here. If Razor thought he could ride into their quiet little world and destroy its harmony without consequences, he was wrong. Justice would be served, not through violence, but through action. And when Jason returned, she knew they would stand together to ensure that Razor paid for what he had done. Jason's hands gripped the steering wheel tightly as he drove to the veterinary clinic, his knuckles white with tension. Max lay across the passenger seat, whimpering softly despite Jason's attempts to soothe him. "You're going to be okay, boy," Jason murmured, glancing at the dog every few seconds. His voice was calm, but his eyes betrayed the storm raging inside him. This wasn't just about a pet being hurt. It felt like a direct attack on his family, on everything he held dear. When they arrived at the clinic, the veterinarian wasted no time examining Max. After a thorough checkup, she confirmed that while there were no broken bones, Max had suffered bruising and might have some internal discomfort for a few days. Jason listened intently, nodding as the vet explained the treatment plan. He stayed by Max's side until the dog drifted off to sleep under the effects of mild sedatives meant to ease his pain. Only then did Jason step outside, his mind racing with thoughts of what came next. The drive back home was quieter this time, though Jason's anger burned brighter than ever. He replayed Mrs. Harper's account of the incident in his head, the sound of Razor's laughter, the deliberate cruelty of the kick, the way Max had yelped in pain. It wasn't just an act of violence, it was an act of dominance, a message that Razor thought he could do whatever he wanted without facing consequences. But Jason wasn't someone who backed down from a fight, especially when it involved protecting those who couldn't protect themselves. Back in the neighborhood, word had spread quickly about what happened. Neighbors gathered in small clusters, their voices low but urgent as they discussed the biker gang and Razor's actions. Some expressed fear, worried about further disturbances, while others were outraged, demanding justice for Max and Luna. Jason found Mrs. Harper still sitting in his yard with Luna, who wagged her tail weakly upon seeing him return. "How's Max?" Mrs. Harper asked immediately, rising to her feet. "He'll recover," Jason replied, his tone clipped. "But we can't let this slide." Mrs. Harper nodded firmly. "I agree." Someone needs to teach that man a lesson. Jason didn't respond right away. Instead, he crouched down to pet Luna, running his hand along her sleek coat. She leaned into his touch, her trust unwavering even after the trauma she'd witnessed. Looking into her eyes, Jason felt a renewed sense of purpose. These dogs depended on him, not just for food and shelter, but for safety and justice, and he wouldn't fail them. That night, Jason sat alone in his living room, staring at the wall as he mapped out a plan. He knew confronting Razor directly would be dangerous, but he also knew he couldn't rely solely on calling the police or filing reports. Razor and his gang thrived on intimidation, and unless someone stood up to them, they would continue terrorizing innocent people and animals. Jason's experience as a stuntman had taught him how to handle high-pressure situations, and his years of discipline gave him the patience to approach this strategically. He began by asking around the neighborhood, gathering information about the bikers. Where did they hang out? How often did they ride through? Did anyone know Razor personally? Slowly, pieces of the puzzle started coming together. A mechanic at a local garage mentioned hearing rumors about the gang frequenting an abandoned warehouse on the outskirts of town. Another neighbor recalled seeing Razor bragging about his exploits at a nearby bar. Each clue brought Jason closer to understanding Razor's world and finding a way to infiltrate it. As he pieced together the details, Jason realized something important. Razor wasn't just reckless, he was arrogant. The biker clearly enjoyed showing off, boasting about his strength and daring. If Jason could use that arrogance against him, he might be able to expose Razor's true nature, not only to the neighborhood, but to Razor's own gang. It wouldn't be easy, but Jason had faced tougher challenges before. By the time dawn broke, Jason had made up his mind. He would track Razor down, confront him, and make sure he understood the weight of his actions. But this wouldn't be done impulsively or recklessly. Every move would be calculated, every word chosen carefully. Justice for Max and Luna wasn't just about revenge. It was about sending a message that cruelty would not be tolerated, not in this neighborhood, and not by anyone. As the sun rose higher in the sky, Jason stepped outside, ready to take the first step toward holding Razor accountable. Jason's plan was simple but risky. He needed to get close enough to Razor to understand him, and then confront him. The abandoned warehouse on the outskirts of town, where the bikers reportedly gathered, became his first target. But walking into a biker gang's hangout wasn't something anyone did casually. Jason knew he had to blend in, to appear like someone who belonged there. That meant trading his usual casual attire for something tougher: ripped jeans, a leather jacket, and boots that looked like they'd seen their share of rough roads. The transformation was striking. Gone was the calm, gentle man who spent his days playing fetch with Max and Luna. In his place stood someone who could easily pass as one of Razor's crew, a man with a quiet confidence and an air of mystery. Armed with this new look, Jason headed toward the warehouse late one evening, parking his truck far enough away not to draw attention. As he approached on foot, the distant hum of motorcycles grew louder, accompanied by the sound of laughter and loud music spilling out into the night. The scene inside was chaotic yet strangely organized. Bikers lounged on makeshift chairs or leaned against their bikes, sharing stories and cracking jokes. Empty beer bottles littered the floor, and the smell of oil and exhaust filled the air. Jason scanned the room, his sharp eyes quickly identifying Razor. The man sat near the center, surrounded by a group of admirers hanging onto his every word. His leather jacket gleamed under the dim lights, and his signature smirk never left his face. Razor was recounting a story, his voice carrying over the noise. "You should have seen it," he boasted, leaning back dramatically. "This mutt thought it could stare me down. I showed it who's boss." His friends laughed, clapping him on the back, clearly impressed by his bravado. Jason's fists clenched involuntarily at the mention of Max, but he forced himself to stay calm. Now wasn't the time to react. It was the time to listen and learn. To avoid suspicion, Jason struck up conversations with other bikers, pretending to be a drifter passing through town. He kept his tone casual, asking questions about the gang and their activities without seeming too eager. Slowly, he earned their trust, or at least enough of it to stick around. Over the next few days, Jason returned to the warehouse multiple times, each visit giving him more insight into Razor's personality and habits. What he discovered wasn't surprising. Razor thrived on fear and intimidation. He loved being the center of attention and couldn't resist showing off his supposed toughness. One evening, Jason saw his chance. Razor was challenging newcomers to prove themselves by taking part in impromptu fights. It was a test of strength and loyalty, and refusing to participate would raise suspicions. Jason hesitated for only a moment before stepping forward. The crowd cheered as he squared off against Razor, who grinned confidently, clearly expecting an easy win. The fight began with Razor throwing the first punch, aiming to end things quickly. But Jason dodged effortlessly, his years of stunt work giving him agility and precision. Blow after blow, Razor grew angrier, his movements becoming sloppy as frustration set in. Jason, on the other hand, remained focused, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. When it came, he delivered a clean hit that sent Razor stumbling backward, gasping for breath. The room fell silent as Razor struggled to regain his footing. For the first time, his smug expression faltered, replaced by shock and embarrassment. Jason didn't press further. Instead, he stepped back, letting Razor save face in front of his gang. The message was clear. Razor wasn't untouchable. And while the bikers whispered among themselves, Jason knew he had gained their respect, even if temporarily. After the fight, Jason cornered Razor outside the warehouse, pulling him aside where no one else could hear. "We need to talk," Jason said, his voice low but firm. Razor blinked, still winded from the fight, but nodded reluctantly. It was the opening Jason had been waiting for. The moment when Razor would realize exactly who he was dealing with. Justice was within reach, and Jason intended to make sure Razor understood the full weight of his actions. The cool night air was heavy with tension as Jason pulled Razor aside, away from the noise and chaos of the warehouse. The distant hum of motorcycles and faint echoes of laughter faded into the background, leaving only the sound of their footsteps crunching against gravel. Razor, still reeling from the fight, tried to mask his discomfort with a scowl, but there was no mistaking the flicker of unease in his eyes. For once, his usual bravado seemed to falter under Jason's steady gaze. "You've got guts," Razor muttered, attempting to regain some control over the situation. "Not many people can take me on like that." Jason didn't respond immediately. Instead, he stepped closer, his presence commanding enough to make Razor instinctively take a step back. When Jason finally spoke, his voice was calm but laced with an intensity that sent a chill down Razor's spine. "I'm not here to make friends or join your crew," he said firmly. "I'm here because of something you did, a choice you made that crossed a line." Razor frowned, confusion clouding his face. "What are you talking about?" Jason leaned in slightly, his piercing eyes locking onto Razor's. "You remember those dogs you kicked for fun? The ones you thought were just another way to show off how tough you are?" He paused, letting the words sink in before delivering the blow that would shatter Razor's confidence. "Well, guess what? Those dogs belong to me." For a moment, Razor froze, his mind racing to process the revelation. Then, as realization dawned, his expression shifted from arrogance to panic. "Wait, you're the owner," he stammered, his voice tinged with disbelief and fear. "That's right," Jason replied, his tone icy. "And now we're going to talk about why someone like you thinks it's okay to hurt innocent animals for entertainment." Razor opened his mouth to protest, but Jason cut him off before he could speak. "Don't bother denying it. I know exactly what happened. My neighbor saw everything. She watched as you swerved toward them, laughed while you kicked my dog, and rode off without a second thought." Jason's voice grew louder, each word hitting Razor like a punch. Max is recovering now, but he's in pain because of you. And Luna. She hasn't been the same since she saw her brother get hurt. Razor's shoulders slumped, his earlier bravado crumbling completely. Look, man, I didn't mean, he began, but Jason wasn't interested in excuses. Didn't mean what? To cause harm. To show everyone how big and bad you are. Jason interrupted, his voice rising with controlled anger. Newsflash. Hurting defenseless creatures doesn't make you tough. It makes you pathetic. Real strength comes from standing up for others, not tearing them down. Razor glanced around nervously, as if hoping someone from his gang might come to his rescue. But they were alone, and the weight of Jason's words pressed down on him like a ton of bricks. Okay, fine, Razor admitted reluctantly, his voice barely above a whisper. I messed up. What do you want from me? Jason took a deep breath, forcing himself to remain composed despite the storm of emotions swirling inside him. First, I want an apology, not to me, but to Max and Luna. You need to face the reality of what you've done and take responsibility for it. Second, this isn't just about my dogs. People like you think they can act however they want without consequences. That stops now. If I ever see you near my property, or any animal, again, I won't hesitate to make sure you regret it. Razor nodded quickly, sweat beading on his forehead. Yeah, okay. I get it. No more messing with animals. I swear. But Jason wasn't finished. And lastly, he added, leaning in so close that Razor flinched, you're going to answer to the law. Hurting animals isn't just cruel. It's illegal. I'll be making sure the authorities hear all about this little stunt of yours. Razor's face paled at the mention of legal trouble. He knew better than anyone that his gang wouldn't protect him if things got serious. All he could do was nod again, muttering a weak apology that sounded hollow even to his own ears. As Jason turned to leave, he felt a strange mix of satisfaction and sadness. Justice had been served in this moment, but it didn't erase the pain Razor had caused. Still, he walked away knowing that Max and Luna, and every other innocent creature in the neighborhood, were safer because of what he'd done. The next morning, Jason wasted no time in ensuring that Razor faced consequences for his actions. He contacted local animal control and filed a detailed report about the incident, including the eyewitness account from Mrs. Harper and the photographs taken by the teenage girl who had been so moved by the event. The authorities took the matter seriously, especially after hearing about Razor's reckless behavior and the injuries inflicted on Max. An investigation was launched, and within days, Razor found himself summoned to the police station. At first, Razor tried to downplay the situation, insisting it had all been a misunderstanding. But Jason's calm demeanor and undeniable evidence painted a clear picture of what had truly happened. Razor's attempts to defend himself only made him look guiltier, and soon he was slapped with multiple charges: animal cruelty, reckless endangerment, and disturbing the peace. The judge didn't mince words during the hearing, emphasizing that acts of violence against animals were not only unacceptable, but also punishable by law. Razor was fined heavily and sentenced to several months of community service at an animal shelter, a fitting punishment for someone who had shown such blatant disregard for their well-being. Meanwhile, news of Razor's arrest spread quickly through the neighborhood. Neighbors who had once feared the biker gang now felt a renewed sense of safety. Word traveled even faster when Jason shared the story online, posting updates about Max's recovery alongside heartfelt messages about treating animals with kindness. The post went viral, sparking outrage and support from thousands of people across the country. Many praised Jason for standing up to Razor, while others shared their own stories of encountering similar cruelty. It became a rallying cry for animal lovers everywhere, reminding communities of the importance of protecting vulnerable creatures. Back home, Max continued to heal under Jason's care. Though he still limped occasionally, his playful spirit returned little by little. Luna stayed glued to his side, as if determined to ensure her brother never felt scared again. Watching them together filled Jason with gratitude, not just for their resilience, but also for the outpouring of love and support from the neighborhood. Mrs. Harper visited often, bringing homemade treats for both the dogs and Jason, while other neighbors stopped by to check on Max's progress. Even the young boy who had cried after witnessing the attack came over one afternoon, shyly offering Max a new chew toy. But perhaps the most surprising change was in Razor himself. Forced to work at the animal shelter as part of his sentence, he initially resented every moment of it. The sight of wagging tails and trusting eyes made him uncomfortable, stirring feelings of guilt he wasn't ready to confront. However, over time, something shifted. The shelter staff noticed that Razor began taking extra care when feeding the animals or cleaning their enclosures. He started learning their names, asking questions about their histories, and even volunteering for tasks beyond his required hours. Though he still had a long way to go, it was clear that the experience was changing him. One evening, as Jason took Max and Luna for a walk, they passed the warehouse where Razor's gang used to gather. To his surprise, the place was deserted. No bikes, no loud music, no signs of trouble. A neighbor later told him that the gang had disbanded after Razor's arrest, unable to maintain their reputation without their leader. It was a small victory, but one that brought peace back to the streets. As Jason watched Max chase a butterfly in the park, he reflected on everything that had happened. What started as a cruel act had turned into a lesson, not just for Razor, but for the entire community. Compassion could triumph over cruelty, and justice didn't always have to come in the form of revenge. Sometimes it came in the quiet moments of healing, connection, and growth. And for Jason, Max, and Luna, life was slowly returning to its peaceful rhythm, a rhythm built on love, trust, and hope for a better tomorrow. Ask, explain. Weeks turned into months, and the neighborhood began to feel like its old self again, only better. The once fearful residents now walked their dogs without glancing over their shoulders, and children played freely in the streets, their laughter echoing through the air. Jason noticed the shift too. It wasn't just the absence of Razor and his gang, but the renewed sense of unity among the neighbors. People who had previously kept to themselves were now organizing weekend barbecues, sharing stories, and looking out for one another. It was as if the entire community had come together, bound by a shared desire to protect what mattered most. Max made a full recovery, his golden coat shining brighter than ever under the sun. He no longer limped and had returned to his energetic self, bounding after tennis balls with the same enthusiasm he'd shown before the incident. Luna, too, seemed lighter, her tail wagging more often as she ran alongside Max. The two dogs became local celebrities of sorts, with neighbors stopping by regularly to give them treats or simply say hello. For Jason, watching them thrive brought a deep sense of fulfillment. They weren't just pets, they were reminders of resilience, love, and the power of standing up for what's right. Inspired by the overwhelming support he'd received online and offline, Jason decided to channel his energy into something bigger. He began volunteering at the same animal shelter where Razor was serving his sentence. At first, the idea felt strange, even uncomfortable, but Jason soon realized how much good could come from turning negativity into action. He spent his weekends helping injured animals recover, organizing adoption drives, and educating people about responsible pet ownership. His efforts didn't go unnoticed. The shelter staff credited him with boosting morale and increasing awareness about animal welfare in the area. What surprised Jason most, however, was the change he saw in Razor. Though they rarely spoke directly, Jason couldn't help but notice how differently Razor interacted with the animals now. Gone was the sneer and dismissive attitude. Instead, there was a gentleness in his movements and a sincerity in his voice when he talked to the dogs. One day, while Jason was walking Max and Luna past the shelter, Razor approached him hesitantly. I wanted to say thanks," Razor mumbled, avoiding eye contact. "For making me do this. I didn't get it at first," but he trailed off, gesturing toward the shelter behind him. "These animals, they trust you even after everything. It makes you think, you know." Jason studied him for a moment, searching for any trace of insincerity. Finding none, he nodded slowly. They deserve better than what happened to Max and Luna. So do you honestly. Just keep doing what you're doing. Razor gave a small, awkward smile before heading back inside. It wasn't perfect closure, but it was progress. And sometimes, that was enough. As time went on, the neighborhood continued to flourish. Mrs. Harper organized an annual event called Paws for Peace, celebrating the bond between humans and animals while raising funds for local shelters. Families brought their pets, kids participated in games, and everyone enjoyed food stalls set up by local businesses. The event became a beloved tradition, drawing visitors from neighboring towns and spreading awareness far beyond the small suburb. For Jason, life settled into a rhythm of purpose and joy. Max and Luna remained his constant companions, bringing light even the darkest days. Together, they explored parks, greeted neighbors, and reminded everyone around them that kindness always triumphed over cruelty. And though Jason knew the world still held challenges, he also knew that communities like his, ones built on compassion and courage, could overcome anything. In the end, the story of Max, Luna, and Jason wasn't just about justice or redemption. It was about hope, the kind that grew stronger with every wagging tail, every friendly bark, and every act of love extended to those who needed it most.